In March 2008, the body of 38-year-old Daniel Carrington was discovered in the basement of The Crest, a luxury condo building in downtown Chicago. An investigation uncovered a chilling web of corporate fraud and corruption tied to billionaire developer Victor LaSalle. In 2006, at the prestigious accounting firm Harper & Gray, a series of decisions were set into motion that would ultimately lead to betrayal, greed, and murder. On the 6th of March, 2008, a cold Thursday morning, the Chicago police received a frantic 911 call from a maintenance worker at The Crest, a luxury condo building in downtown Chicago. His voice trembled with urgency as he described finding a man lying motionless in the dimly lit basement. The man, later identified as Daniel Carrington, was sprawled face down on the cement floor, a dark pool of blood slowly spreading around his head. The sight had paralyzed the worker, who stood frozen until he managed to shakily dial for help. When officers arrived on the scene, they were met with a haunting silence, broken only by the hum of the building's old furnace. The basement, primarily used for storage, was poorly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Daniel's body lay near the utility room, his lifeless form marked by the precision of his death, a single gunshot wound to the back of his head. The wound, and the absence of any sign of struggle, suggested that he had been taken by surprise. The execution-style killing spoke of cold calculation, leaving the detectives uneasy as they began documenting the grim scene. Carrington's appearance added to the mystery. Despite the violence, his expensive gray suit remained unruffled, as if he had been ambushed in the middle of an ordinary workday. His briefcase lay nearby, its contents undisturbed, adding to the growing sense that this was no random act of violence. By mid-afternoon, investigators had confirmed his identity. Daniel Carrington, a 38-year-old accountant, was a rising star in Chicago's financial circles. Known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor, he was admired professionally, but had few close personal connections. His marriage to Natalie Carrington had fallen apart 2 years earlier, leaving behind an estranged wife and whispers of tension. Daniel's professional partner, Julian Price, a charismatic but guarded man, was his closest ally, or so it seemed on the surface. The police reached out to Natalie first. On the 8th of March, she was brought in for questioning. Despite their estrangement, Natalie appeared deeply shaken by the news of Daniel's murder. She recounted their marriage as a mix of success and struggle, marked by Daniel's relentless ambition and increasing detachment in his later years. She admitted they hadn't spoken much since the divorce, but revealed a curious detail. Daniel had confided in her shortly before his death, hinting at a mounting fear of someone he referred to as a shadow. Natalie claimed he had been vague, brushing off her concerns when she pressed for more details. She described Daniel as a man who internalized his troubles, rarely revealing the full extent of what was on his mind. When the detectives turned their attention to Julian Price, the contrast between his outward charm and his guarded responses was striking. Julian, who had partnered with Daniel to manage some of Chicago's wealthiest accounts, described their relationship as strictly professional. Yet there was a lingering hesitation in his tone as he spoke of Daniel's behavior in recent weeks. Julian admitted that Daniel had become paranoid, frequently checking over his shoulder and speaking cryptically about needing to clean house. When pressed, Julian deflected, claiming he didn't pry into his partner's personal affairs. As the investigation continued, the detectives began sifting through Daniel's personal and professional life. His laptop, found in his apartment, held a trove of encrypted files that hinted at a side of Daniel no one had seen before. The encryption was sophisticated, suggesting that Daniel had been deliberately hiding sensitive information. On the 20th of March, forensic analysts managed to break through the first layer of security, uncovering documents and spreadsheets that exposed a stunning revelation: a sprawling $15 million tax evasion scheme. The scheme wasn't a simple misstep in accounting. It involved shell companies, falsified invoices, and a network of influential businessmen working together to siphon millions in unpaid taxes. Daniel's role seemed central. He wasn't just an observer, but an orchestrator. Yet, the files painted an incomplete picture. They hinted at pressures beyond greed, suggesting Daniel might have been coerced into his involvement. These discoveries opened a Pandora's box of questions. Who else knew about the scheme? Had Daniel planned to expose it, or had he been silenced to protect the secret? The name Victor LaSalle, a powerful real estate developer, surfaced multiple times in the files, but connections remained murky. For the detectives, every answer seemed to lead to more questions, deepening the mystery surrounding Daniel's life and death. As the city buzzed with speculation about the murder of one of its prominent accountants, the detectives couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Daniel Carrington's secrets had started to unravel, and with them came a chilling realization. His murder wasn't just a crime, it was a message, one that would echo far beyond the quiet basement of the Crest. In 2006, Daniel Carrington was at the peak of his career. His name echoed in the hallways of Harper & Gray, the prestigious accounting firm, where he had carved out a reputation as a meticulous and ethical professional. His rise within the firm had been swift, fueled by his sharp intellect and a relentless drive to prove himself. Daniel wasn't just an accountant. He was the person people trusted with their most complicated financial puzzles. It was this reputation that caught the attention of billionaire developer Victor LaSalle, one of Chicago's most influential and controversial figures. Victor LaSalle's construction empire was legendary, stretching across states and dominating skylines with towering luxury projects. But his business practices had always been a topic of whispered speculation. To most, LaSalle was a visionary. To others, he was a man who played dangerously close to the edge of legality. When LaSalle requested Daniel's expertise to audit his company's financials, it was seen as an honor. For Daniel, it felt like a golden opportunity, a chance to prove his worth on a grander stage. As Daniel immersed himself in LaSalle's financial records, the picture that emerged was far from clean. The books were a labyrinth of false entries, phony vendors, and offshore accounts. Daniel's sharp eye quickly identified the glaring discrepancies: millions of dollars in unreported income, and transactions that didn't add up. At first, he assumed LaSalle had been duped by an unscrupulous accountant. But the deeper he dug, the clearer it became that the fraud was intentional and orchestrated. Initially, Daniel felt compelled to report his findings. This was, after all, the kind of unethical behavior that he had built his career standing against. But before he could act, LaSalle called him in for a private meeting. The conversation was disarming. LaSalle didn't deny the irregularities. Instead, he framed them as strategic accounting, a victimless game that allowed him to keep his business afloat in a competitive industry. He offered Daniel a choice: report the findings and risk alienating a powerful client, or join the operation and share in the immense profits. For days, Daniel wrestled with the decision. He wasn't a man drawn to easy money, but life had its pressures. Student loans still loomed over him. His divorce from Natalie had left him financially drained, and the allure of financial freedom was difficult to ignore. When LaSalle sweetened the offer with promises of discretion and significant payouts, Daniel finally relented, convincing himself that the scheme was harmless. It wasn't theft, he told himself, just creative accounting. By mid-2006, Daniel was fully embedded in the scheme. His expertise became invaluable, streamlining the fraudulent practices and concealing the money trail with precision. The payouts were substantial, allowing Daniel to clear his debts, upgrade his lifestyle, and project an image of success that masked his growing guilt. But no amount of money could silence the nagging voice in his mind that questioned his choices. He began to avoid Natalie, his ex-wife, and even his closest friends, fearing they might see through him. As 2007 rolled in, the scheme expanded. LaSalle's ambitions grew, and with them came the need for more collaborators. Daniel found himself managing not just LaSalle's accounts, but those of several high-profile clients, including city council members and a deputy mayor. These officials funneled public funds into fraudulent development projects, receiving kickbacks in return. Daniel became the linchpin of an intricate network of corruption, his once pristine reputation now deeply entangled in the deceit. Unbeknownst to Daniel, cracks were already forming. Investigative journalist Emily Vargas, known for her dogged pursuit of the truth, had been following LaSalle's projects for months. Public records showed inconsistencies in the city's budgets tied to LaSalle's developments, and Emily was determined to uncover the source. Her investigations led her to Harper & Gray, where Daniel's name began to appear frequently in connection with suspicious transactions. Meanwhile, within the operation itself, tensions were rising. One of Daniel's co-conspirators, Bradley Knox, was growing increasingly reckless. A brash and impulsive businessman, Knox believed he deserved a larger share of the profits. By late 2007, Knox began making threats, hinting that he would expose the operation unless he received more money. His unpredictable behavior alarmed Daniel, who knew that any leak could bring the entire scheme crashing down. The tension reached a boiling point in December 2007. At a high-profile charity gala, Daniel crossed paths with Emily Vargas. She approached him casually, her tone friendly, but her words carried an unmistakable edge. Without revealing too much, Emily hinted at the irregularities she had uncovered, making it clear she was close to the truth. Her probing questions rattled Daniel, who excused himself as quickly as possible. The encounter left him shaken. That night, he confided in his colleague and closest confidant, Julian Price. Julian, calm and calculated, advised Daniel to come forward and seek legal protection. But Daniel hesitated, paralyzed by the fear of retaliation from LaSalle and his powerful network. In January 2008, the situation took a darker turn. Bradley Knox, emboldened by his frustrations, stormed into Daniel's office unannounced. Their argument grew heated, loud enough for Daniel's secretary to hear muffled threats through the closed door. Knox demanded more money, threatening to go public if his demands weren't met. Days later, Knox's car was found abandoned on the outskirts of the city. Blood stains on the driver's seat suggested foul play, but his body was never recovered. The incident sent shock waves through the operation, serving as a chilling reminder of how high the stakes had become. By February 2008, Emily Vargas published the first installment of her exposé. The article implicated Victor LaSalle, detailing the discrepancies in his developments and raising questions about his financial practices. While Emily stopped short of naming Daniel, the pressure on him intensified. LaSalle, already suspicious of leaks within the group, began to turn his attention toward Daniel. The trust that had once underpinned their arrangement was eroding, and Daniel could feel the noose tightening around him. Each passing day brought a new wave of anxiety, and Daniel's once steady demeanor began to crack. The walls were closing in, and he knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. By the 20th of February, 2008, Daniel Carrington could no longer ignore the weight crushing his soul. The fear that had once been a faint whisper was now a deafening roar in his mind. Every decision he had made over the past 2 years, every compromise of his principles, seemed to lead him to this moment. He was haunted not just by what he had done, but by what he had become. A man tangled in deceit, corruption, and now the shadow of death. The realization had come to him slowly, but with the force of inevitability. Bradley Knox was gone, likely murdered for his reckless demands. Emily Vargas's expose was circling closer to the truth, and LaSalle's paranoia was growing by the day. Daniel knew his involvement in the scheme wasn't just a secret. It was a noose tightening around his neck. He had been a willing participant, but now he was trapped, and the only way out was to tell the truth. Late that night, in the small, dimly lit study of his apartment, Daniel began to gather the pieces of his life that could still hold meaning. His laptop became his confessional. He compiled every document, every email, and every financial record he had touched that connected him to LaSalle's empire of fraud. He worked methodically, the flicker of the screen casting shadows on his tired face. The files were damning, detailing millions in laundered funds, bribes to city officials, and even hints of Knox's disappearance. With every click, he felt the weight lifting slightly, though the fear remained. He encrypted the files and backed them up on a secure drive, hiding it in the hollow base of a table lamp in his study. This was his safeguard, the one thing that might protect him if he didn't survive what came next. He thought briefly of calling the authorities immediately, but he wasn't ready, not yet. He needed to confide in someone he trusted, someone who could help him navigate the storm. On the 21st of February, Daniel reached out to Julian Price. Julian had been his closest ally for years, the one person who had always seemed to have his back. Over coffee, in the quiet corner of a downtown cafe, Daniel laid out his plan in subdued tones, careful not to draw attention. He revealed his intention to turn over the evidence and cooperate with authorities, hoping to bring an end to the scheme before it claimed more lives. Julian listened intently, his face calm, but beneath the surface, his mind was reeling. What Daniel didn't know was that Julian was already deeply compromised. In secret, Julian had been borrowing money from LaSalle to cover his own mounting debts. LaSalle's influence over him was absolute, and Julian knew that betraying him wasn't an option. As Daniel spoke, Julian weighed his options, his thoughts a mix of self-preservation and reluctant guilt. By the end of their meeting, he had made his decision. Daniel trusted him, and Julian would use that trust to save himself. Within hours, Julian met with LaSalle in the back room of an upscale restaurant. The air was tense as he revealed Daniel's intentions. LaSalle's reaction was cold, calculated. He didn't rant or rage, he simply nodded, absorbing the information. By the end of the meeting, LaSalle had a plan, one that would ensure Daniel wouldn't live to see the truth come to light. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze for Daniel. He carried on with his routine, but the paranoia was unbearable. He felt watched everywhere he went, the weight of invisible eyes following him. By the 5th of March, LaSalle made his move. Using his charm and influence, he contacted Daniel, inviting him to a meeting at the Crest, a luxury condominium where LaSalle often hosted private discussions. LaSalle framed it as an opportunity to resolve their differences and finalize the dissolution of their partnership. Desperate to believe that LaSalle might let him walk away, Daniel agreed. That evening, he arrived at the Crest, the tall building casting long shadows in the fading light. He was greeted by a concierge and directed to the basement level, a private area LaSalle claimed was perfect for confidential discussions. Daniel hesitated briefly at the elevator, his instincts warning him to leave. But he pushed forward, driven by a fragile hope. The basement was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery the only sound. LaSalle wasn't there. Instead, Daniel found himself face to face with a masked figure, the glint of a pistol catching the dim light. There was no time to plead, no chance to escape. The gunshot echoed through the room, shattering the silence. Daniel collapsed instantly, his lifeless body crumpling to the cold cement floor. His carefully laid plans, his encrypted files, and his hopes of redemption died with him. The hitman disappeared into the shadows, leaving Daniel alone in a growing pool of blood. It wasn't until the next morning that a maintenance worker stumbled upon the scene, triggering a chain of events that would finally expose the truth. The encrypted files Daniel had hidden would become the key to unraveling the scheme. Forensic experts, working tirelessly, managed to access the data by the 10th of March, uncovering a trove of evidence that linked LaSalle, Julian, and several city officials to an intricate web of corruption. Emily Vargas, determined to honor Daniel's memory, stepped forward with her own findings, providing investigators with crucial context. Julian Price, now under surveillance, made a critical mistake. Surveillance footage placed him near the crest on the night of Daniel's murder. His attempts to maintain an alibi crumbled, and by the 15th of March, he was arrested. The trail of evidence led straight to LaSalle, whose fingerprints were all over the operation. His arrest on the 20th of March sent shockwaves through Chicago's elite, exposing a network of corruption that reached far beyond Daniel's tragic death. In the end, Daniel's decision to act, though it cost him his life, became the catalyst for justice. His encrypted files not only brought down a powerful criminal, but also shed light on the darker corners of the city, forcing an entire community to confront its complicity in a system built on greed and betrayal. The aftermath of Daniel Carrington's murder was as complex as the life he had lived. The web of corruption he had been entangled in was exposed in shocking detail during the trial, shaking Chicago's political and business elite. But the ripples of the tragedy didn't stop at the courtroom. They spread outward, touching everyone who had been connected to Daniel's story in profound and lasting ways. Emily Vargas, the journalist whose relentless reporting had cracked open the case, became the face of journalistic integrity in the wake of the scandal. Her series of articles, based on Daniel's encrypted files and her own investigative work, painted a vivid picture of greed, deception, and betrayal at the highest levels of power. The public was captivated by her work, which uncovered not only the corruption of Victor LaSalle, but also the complicity of city officials and other influential players. In 2009, Emily's reporting earned her the prestigious Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. The honor was a validation of her tireless pursuit of the truth, but it came with a heavy burden. The deeper Emily had dug, the more she uncovered about the pervasive nature of corruption. For every crime exposed, there were whispers of others left unreported, hidden behind layers of deceit. By the time she stood on the stage to accept the Pulitzer, Emily was no longer the idealistic journalist who had started investigating LaSalle's development projects. The case had left her disillusioned, questioning whether justice could truly prevail in a system so deeply flawed. Despite her public accolades, Emily withdrew from the limelight in the months that followed. She turned down lucrative offers to write books and host television specials, choosing instead to focus on mentoring young journalists. She believed in the power of the press, but knew firsthand how dangerous the pursuit of truth could be. Her experience with the case had taught her that change was slow and often came at great personal cost. For Natalie Carrington, Daniel's widow, the years following his death were marked by both grief and a determination to salvage something meaningful from the tragedy. The revelations about Daniel's involvement in LaSalle's scheme had been a bitter pill to swallow, tarnishing the image of the man she had once loved. But as the full story emerged, Natalie came to understand the fear and guilt that had driven Daniel in his final days. She saw his decision to gather evidence and expose the truth as an act of redemption, one that ultimately cost him his life. When a portion of the assets recovered from LaSalle's empire was awarded to Daniel's estate, Natalie decided to use the money to honor his memory. In 2010, she established the Carrington Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to aiding whistleblowers and exposing corporate crime. The foundation became a beacon of hope for those trapped in unethical systems, providing legal and financial support to individuals willing to stand up against corruption. The work gave Natalie a sense of purpose, helping her channel her pain into something positive. She became a quiet but determined advocate, working behind the scenes to build partnerships with investigative journalists and legal experts. The Foundation's successes, including several high-profile cases, were a testament to her unwavering commitment. But for Natalie, the work was also deeply personal. It was her way of ensuring that Daniel's story would not be forgotten, that his sacrifice would mean something. Meanwhile, the city of Chicago grappled with the fallout from the scandal. The arrests of Victor LaSalle and Julian Price, along with several city officials, sent shockwaves through the political and business communities. Public outrage forced the city government to implement reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. New regulations were introduced to monitor development projects and prevent the kind of fraudulent practices LaSalle had used to enrich himself. Yet despite these changes, whispers of ongoing corruption lingered. For every official held accountable, there seemed to be others who had slipped through the cracks. The system, while shaken, remained intact, its foundations too entrenched to be completely uprooted by a single case. Residents of Chicago, weary but hopeful, watched as the city attempted to rebuild its reputation. In the years that followed, Daniel's name became a symbol of both caution and hope. To some, he was a cautionary tale, a man whose ambition had led him down a dangerous path. To others, he was a tragic hero, someone who had tried to make amends and paid the ultimate price. His story continued to resonate, sparking debates about morality, justice, and the cost of redemption. For those closest to him, the memory of Daniel was a constant presence. Emily Vargas, though she rarely spoke about the case publicly, kept a framed copy of one of Daniel's encrypted files on her desk, a reminder of the power of truth. Natalie Carrington, in her quiet moments, often visited the small garden she had planted in his honor, a place where she could reflect on the man he had been and the legacy he had left behind. The aftermath of Daniel Carrington's death was not a clean resolution. It was messy and imperfect, a reflection of the world he had lived in. But amidst the grief and disillusionment, there were glimmers of hope, acts of courage and determination that reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments,